Welcome to the deep dive. We take stacks of info, pull out the best bits just for you. So today we're looking at this puzzle, really. Something maybe you've noticed. Why do some efforts to connect with communities just, well, take off? Huge success. And then others, just as much passion, same dedication, they just kind of fizzle out. We see pastors, churches, super excited, growing like crazy. But then, yeah, just as many are hitting a wall, feeling frustrated, using strategies that just aren't working like they thought they would. So what's really going on? Our sources today suggest it's not just about being called or gifted. Passion isn't quite enough. It's maybe more about the model you're using, the actual approach. So our mission in this deep dive is to unpack that. What if? What if North America itself has become a kind of mission field? Like, it needs a totally fresh perspective, new ways of seeing things. We're going to look at some, frankly, surprising stats about religious identity, and we'll dive into this idea of the glocal context, global meets local. Plus, we'll explore three different ways, three lenses to understand the folks right around us. Missionaries always knew they had to really understand a place before doing anything. What if that's exactly what we need right here at home to kind of crack the code? Okay, let's get into it. So our sources lay out this core problem. Equal commitment, right? But wildly different results in reaching people. It says pretty directly, the way you do things does impact your ability to reach your community effectively. It's not just trying hard, it's how you try. So this code, what are we actually talking about breaking here?
Right. And it's interesting because breaking the code isn't finding, like, the one magic formula, the single best model. That's often the assumption, isn't it? People want the answer. But the sources define it more like discovering the principles that work in every context, selecting the tools most relevant for your context, and then learning to apply them in a missionally effective manner. It's about thinking missiologically, a whole different mindset, really, not just copying someone else.
Okay, thinking missiologically. So that means we probably need to rethink what mission even means for us here, right? Which leads to that idea you mentioned, North America as a mission field. That might sound kind of strange to some folks. The sources point out a lot of leaders see evangelism, that's telling people about Jesus nearby, and then missions, that's like understanding people far away before you tell them. So they're thinking about overseas missions, but maybe missing the mission field right next door.
Exactly. And if you connect that, it really forces a rethink. The source contrasts missiology with missional thinking. So missiology concerns itself with study about missions and its methodologies. Okay, that's the academic side. While missional thinking focuses on doing missions everywhere, it's active, it's present. It makes us see our geographical context through the lenses of people groups, population segments, and cultural environments. Basically, the core message is we're all missionaries, wherever we happen to be. And that means doing the work of understanding first, the culture, the people, before we jump in. And digging into that context, the sources talk about the emerging glocal context. Sounds a bit academic maybe, but it's just that convergence. Global stuff happening right here locally. I mean, just think about your own town, the languages you hear walking down the street, the different kinds of restaurants. It's more than just, interesting variety. The sources argue it fundamentally changes how we need to connect. We have to think globally, even when acting locally.
Yeah, absolutely. And they point out it's just harder now. Way harder. Like, historically, if someone in North America was spiritually searching, the church was probably, near the top of their list.
Right.
First stop, maybe. But today, it often doesn't even crack the top 10. Wow. Years ago, people looked to the church for answers. Now the source says, many look to anybody and anything but us. That's a pretty big shift. A challenge in, trust and where people even look, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It is. And it kind of begs the question about the bigger cultural shift behind it. The source uses the term postmodernism here, sort of as a shorthand, which is smart because getting into all its academic meanings, well, that's a whole other deep dive. But for what we're talking about, it's really about the essence, the rejection of the modern view of life, and the embracing of something new. And this isn't just like young people liking different music. It's deeper. It's how people think, how they see authority, how they find meaning. It's a worldview shift.
Right. But here's where it gets really interesting, according to the sources. While the big culture has shifted language, music, worldview, all of it, they suggest that most evangelicals live in these modern pockets of culture. Like, they've been somewhat insulated from all these changes, maybe still living and thinking a lot like their parents did, but, and this is key, the changes are super visible in their children's lives.
Right.
How they think and reason, how they view life, and how they act differently. So if you're in one of these pockets, but the world, even your own kids, are operating differently, what's the risk there? What problems does that insulation cause?
That's exactly it. The risk is a massive disconnect. You just don't understand each other. And the data really bears this out. Let's look at some numbers. Percentage of Christians in the U.S. dropped from 86% in 1990 down to 77% by 2001. That's according to a CUNY survey. 9% drop in about 11 years. That's significant.
Okay, and when they talk about the unchurched, is there a clear definition? Because that word can mean different things to different people, can it?
Good question. Yeah, the source uses George Barna's definition, which is actually pretty generous. It's adults who have not attended a Christian church service within the past 6 months, not including a holiday service or a special event, like a wedding or funeral.
Yeah.
So pretty minimal attendance required to not be counted as unchurched.
Okay, even with that broad definition, have the numbers changed much? Has that group grown?
Grown. It's exploded. Just let this soak in. Since 1991, up to around 2004 when this data was gathered, the number of adults who don't attend church, by that definition, nearly doubled. It went from about 39 million people to 75 million. That's a 92% increase. I mean, that's not just a small shift. That's a huge demographic wave.
Yeah.
Really demands attention. Right, 92% increase. Wow. That is stark. And there's this related trend, too, isn't there? This idea of being spiritual but not religious. The sources mention a Gallup poll from back in 2002. 50% Americans call themselves religious. Okay. But a third, 33%, said they were spiritual but not religious. And it's not just how people talk. The sources say media, academia, they often push this idea. Spirituality is good, religion is bad. And maybe that explains this other stat. Fall 2004, incoming college freshmen, 17% checked none for religion. That was the same percentage as checked Protestant. Tied. That's a massive shift for young adults.
It is, and it brings up this other point about commitment, even for those who do identify as Christian. The sources point to challenges within the church, too. Among self-identified born-again Christians, some data suggests divorce rates might even be higher than the unchurched, and around 10 million of these self-proclaimed born-again Christians hadn't been to church in the last 6 months outside of holidays. So the challenge isn't just reaching out, it's also about what's happening inside.
Okay, so if North America is this really complex, diverse, global mission field, how on earth do we start to make sense of it? How do we connect? Well, the sources give us these 3 lenses, 3 ways to help break the code among the unchurched. A framework, maybe? Let's look at the first one, people groups, and specifically ethnic diversity.
Right. The source calls this the ethnic millennium. And the numbers are pretty staggering. Think about the 1990s. U.S. population grew about 6%. Okay, but Asian populations grew 107%. Hispanic population, 53%. Huge growth. And get this, 25 of the largest U.S. cities are now majority ethnic. Like 61% in Chicago, 73% in New York City, 78% in L.A. There are more Filipinos and Armenians in L.A. than anywhere else, more Cubans in Miami than Havana. This isn't just, pockets of diversity. It's the mainstream reality in many places.
That really paints a picture. Makes me think of that example they gave, Dave Gibbons in New Song Church. They call him a pioneer in breaking the code among emerging multi-ethnic churches. Launched in '94, met all over the place, made up of like 15 different ethnic groups, mainly Asian, but growing Hispanic, African-American. And they're passionate about global stuff, social justice. It shows how understanding those distinct groups shapes everything they do.
Exactly. And the principle behind it is key. The gospel needs to penetrate every culture, and every culture needs to be exegeted for the gospel. Exegeted like you'd study a text. We need to deeply understand the cultural context to communicate effectively, like doing anthropology in our own cities.
Okay, so ethnic diversity is lens 1. What about groups that aren't defined by ethnicity? The sources call them population segments. What are those exactly? How do they have a code?
Yeah, these are groups bound by a common experience, something shared that's significant enough to impact values, belief, and lifestyle. So the shared experience creates these, well, the source calls them new tribal communities. They're not ethnic groups, necessarily. They're unified by life situations, interests, something that shapes their view of the world.
Okay, can you give some examples? Because that sounds like it could cover a lot of ground.
Oh, definitely. The sources list things like second-generation Asians, young urban runaways, factory workers, parents of sports-active children, former addicts, wealthy Anglo professionals, divorced mothers with preschoolers, cowboys, victims of crime, skateboarders. See, it's the shared experience. If it's strong enough to shape values and lifestyle, it forms a unique group, a segment with its own code. Good. And understanding that has led to things like cowboy churches or biker churches or recovery churches, really specific approaches.
Fascinating. Okay, ethnic groups, population segments, and the third lens is cultural environments. How can a place, like a geographical environment, define a code? What are some examples here?
Right. How does our physical space shape us? The source points to collegiate churches planted among the universities and colleges. They mention Jason Ma, who started campus church networks. It was a house church network model designed for college campuses. He saw a huge need at San Jose University. Hardly any students were connecting with local churches. So his model trained student leaders to reach their friends, start small churches right there in their dorms or apartments. It was a code tailored to that university world.
That's really smart, meeting people right where they are, adapting to that specific place.
Yeah.
What other kinds of environments did the sources mention? Where else does this apply?
Yeah, they listed others like multi-housing units, big apartment complexes, maybe nursing homes, prisons and jails, factories, even office complexes.
Yeah.
Each one is its own little world, right? With its own dynamics, its own ways people relate, its own code you need to understand to connect authentically.
So bringing it all back, the main message from these sources seems pretty clear. This idea that we are now global and local at the same time. It's unavoidable. North America is maybe the most diverse place on Earth. Hundreds of languages, countless subcultures, segments. This glocal thing isn't just a theory. It's the reality we're living in, shaping every conversation.
Absolutely. And that reality should make us stop and think. Change how we speak, how we act. The sources really emphasize that while the culture changed, most evangelical churches have not. And just, preaching the gospel or loving people, while essential, it might not be enough if you're not also understanding them, communicating with them in ways that actually connect with their specific code, their world, earning that hearing.
Yeah. Which leads to that really powerful statement you mentioned earlier that kind of sums it all up. Proclaiming the gospel means to proclaim a gospel about the word becoming flesh. Okay, the incarnation, and proclaiming that the body of Christ needs to become incarnate in every cultural expression. Wow. That's a call to really embed ourselves, isn't it? To understand, adapt, to reflect the message itself and how we engage with different cultures. So we've covered a lot. How understanding this shift in culture, seeing North America as this global mission field, and using these lenses, people groups, population segments, cultural environments, how that can really change how we connect, how we communicate. It really seems like effectiveness comes from that deep understanding, that humility, not just pure effort. So the question for you, listening right now, is what does this mean where you are? Think about your own context, your job, your neighborhood, maybe your kids' school, your social scene. How could you start applying these ideas, these missional principles, to maybe spot the different codes of the groups and segments and environments right around you, ones you hadn't really seen that way before? What could success even look like if you approached communication differently, if you really tried to exegete their culture, like our expert said? These ideas, they offer a pretty powerful framework, I think, for navigating things today. We hope maybe it challenges some assumptions, opens up some new ways for you to connect, understand people better wherever you find yourself.